Hello there and welcome to another Disneyland Paris tips video. Today I'm going to be giving my 25 top tips about queues. This video is a little bit of an extension of another video and also comes from some requests from viewers. Last week I did a video where I just generally chatted on the subject of queues, and I deliberately didn't want to do a tips video at the time because I really wanted to talk about how they worked, how to think about them, what to expect when you get there. And I worry when I do tips videos, people think I'm just going to give you some magic tricks and everything will be okay. So if you haven't watched that video yet, I think there's a lot of useful stuff in there that will support some of the things I'm going to tell you now. So either go back and watch it now if it's convenient, or put it on your playlist for later. I'm going to put a card up in the corner there that you can click on, and also it'll be in the description down below. Right, let's rattle into it then. Tip number 1, use extra magic time. Now this is a system that allows hotel guests and annual pass holders, only Infinity Pass holders and Magic Plus Pass holders though, to get into the park an hour before everybody else. If the park opens at 9:30, it'll be 8:30, and that is in both parks, Walt Disney Studios and Disneyland Park. And that takes me on to tip number 2. If you're able to use extra magic time, use your extra magic time wisely. Don't shop, eat or take photographs in front of the castle. You can do all that later. Now is a really good time to get well into the park, get to the back of the park and start riding some rides before the general public arrive. There are several trains of thought on this. Some people would advise you to go straight to the rides with the biggest queues, but my tip is a little bit different. I would say use 45 minutes of it to knock out as many small rides as you can. We're talking Buzz, we're talking Dumbo, Teacups, Carousel, those kind of things that will probably get quite high wait times later, but going to be next to 0 wait times during extra magic time. And then just before the whole park opens for realsies, nip into one of the longer queues, so you get ahead of the rest of the general public, but you've also got a lot of rides in that hour. Now, just while I'm on that subject, I suppose this would be a tip number 2.5 is check which rides are open in advance so you can have a bit of a plan. And these vary wildly. In my experience, it is Fantasyland and Discoveryland only, but not all rides open. So the ones at the back of the park, like Casey Jr., won't necessarily open. Peter Pan doesn't always open at the beginning of extra magic time, neither does Space Mountain. But you can find these listed in the lobby of your hotel. And if you're not sure, ask a member of cast on the way in. Tip number 3, if you're not able to use extra magic hours because you're not staying on site, then rope drop a big attraction that hasn't been included in extra magic hours. If it's a day that Peter Pan has opened for extra magic time, by the time you're able to get into the park and right to the back of the park, that queue will already be full of hotel guests. But quite often Big Thunder Mountain is not included, and neither is Phantom Manor in extra magic time, so they're close to the front of the park. So actually hotel guests have no advantage over those rides whatsoever. So I would see if you as well can find out what rides are in extra magic time. If you're not sure at this point in the day, you're able to go on the app, and if it doesn't have a wait time, it means it's not open. So other tips to do with timing. Going to ride rides during the parade or just before the parade when everybody's waiting is a good tip. It won't necessarily give you as big an advantage on the big e-ticket rides that you might think it will. Again, things like Peter Pan, Pirates, it might not make that big a difference. But where it will make a difference is rides that are quite close to the parade route. The one that's the most obvious is It's a Small World, because the parade goes right past. Now, beware of this, because if the parade is going past and you've already watched it or you plan on watching it another day, go on Small World and it'll be almost a walk-on because everybody will be stood watching the parade. But you must beware, because the minute the final float goes past everyone will turn around and go on It's a Small World. So I think that latter end of Fantasyland is a good one to do. Maybe a bit of Frontierland. But again, this is why I was hesitant about doing a tips video. That's not a hard and fast rule. It's just a tip. Tip number 5, again, not a hard and fast rule, but a good tip, is to go on rides at the very end of the day. In the last hour, people start camping out for the fireworks a good hour before they're actually on. So this is an excellent time to go and mop up some really short wait times at the back of the park. If you go around Adventureland and Frontierland just before the fireworks, you can often get quite a few walk-ons. There's a rule in the American parks that is very strict, that if you arrive before park closing, you are allowed in that queue no matter how long it is. So if you arrive at a 60-minute queue at 1 minute to 10 and the parks close at 10, you're still allowed to stand in that queue, and they will keep letting people ride that ride until everyone in the queue has ridden it. Now in Paris, they do have the same rule, but they're a little bit more inconsistent about following it through. Sometimes they will shut the queue down 10 minutes before closing. Sometimes they'll still be letting people in 5 minutes past. But it's definitely worth thinking about in that last 15 minutes of the day. Don't just give up and think, oh, you've not time to ride anything. Go and see if you can get in some of the queues if you don't mind the late nights. Now, that's just going to bring me on to a question that somebody asked me this week. They said that they've heard that just after the parade and when it gets onto dinner time that the wait times tend to go down a bit, but they wanted to know by how much. I think that's a solid comment, and it is a tip. It will be slightly lower during meal times, but in this day and age, the parks are so packed all the way through the day. There's so much pent-up demand after COVID, etc., that we're not seeing those big ebb and flows that we used to see. So it's worth checking when you're there, but I wouldn't say that is as consistent as the last hour, the parades, and the early magic time. The next 6 tips are all to do with using Disneyland Paris's systems. Tip number 6 is, if you qualify, get a disability access pass. Now, I'm not going to talk about that further because it is a very detailed subject. They will tailor passes to your individual disabilities and needs. Your needs can include things like cognitive and sensory disorders. So if you've got children on the autistic spectrum, it's worth looking into whether you qualify for a disability access pass. Because it's all to do with medical and personal things, and I'm not an expert on the subject, I'm not going to go into it here, but I recommend if you think that you might qualify for something, Google it, go on Disneyland Paris's website and find out. Tip number 7, I know a little bit more about this subject, and that is use rider swap, also known as parent swap, also known as baby swap. If you are a family with young children who are too short to ride some of the rides, what you can do is one parent can queue, ride that ride, get a rider swap pass at the end, and then the other parent can go straight in the fast pass queue without having to queue. So you only have to queue once as a family. It really is a lifesaver. We started going when our daughter was 2, and for those first 2 or 3 years we did all the big rides like this. And it's also a good thing to do while the baby is snoozing in the pushchair. One of you can go on a big ride, come back, swap, the other one can go shopping. A lot of the rides work slightly differently as to which entrance they use and what form the pass takes. So the best thing to do before you get in the main queue, ask the cast member at the front of the ride if you can do parent swap, and they will tell you what you need to know. Tip number 8, there is also a single rider. Because a lot of the rides you sit in 2s, and a lot of families come in even numbers, 2s, 4s and 6s. Whenever there's a family of 3, that means there will be a spare seat in that ride vehicle. So they have a separate queue for the single riders just to fill in those vehicles. These single rider queues are often quite short and move quicker than the traditional queue. That's not a guarantee. There was a time when Hugh got in a single rider queue for parachute drop, and it actually ended up taking him longer because there was so many families of 2, 4 and 6 in the queue. It's a good system, and they also have a separate wait time posted at the entrance of the ride. Just by the by, you can also do that as a family of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, but as long as you're not bothered about sitting together, you can just each go as an individual rider and sit elsewhere on the vehicles. And then my next few is that's very expensive Elephant in the Room Premier Access Pass. This is different to Premier Access Ultimate that I talked about in the other video, where you can ride all the rides for a single lump sum. Go back and watch the other video if you want to know about that. This is where you pay for individual rides on the day. Sometimes, literally when you stood outside the ride, you can just pay money to get an instant access pass. My advice for this would be tip number 9. Budget in advance. Decide how many times you're willing to do this, because it could get very addictive and just you end up doing it on every ride, and I don't necessarily think you need to do that. If you go on your trip saying we'll allow ourselves 1 Premier Access Pass a day, or maybe you allow yourself 5 for the whole trip, you've budgeted and you're not going to go crazy with the spending once you get there. Tip number 10, still on Premier Access, always check the times of that ride before you purchase it. Don't presume that something is going to have an astronomical wait all day. Buy it in the morning, because sometimes you can get there, particularly for something like Buzz. You could buy that Premier Access without looking at the ride and get to it, and it's only 15-minute wait, in which case you've pretty much wasted your money, because the Fast Pass queue joins the standby queue about 10 minutes before the ride, so you've gained nothing. So don't buy it without looking what the standby wait actually is. You might be pleasantly surprised. And number 11 with your Premier Access is be strategic. Now, this means to you whatever it means to you, according to the first 2 things, what your budget is and what your wait threshold is for certain rides, as to how you're going to use it. Are you going to say to each other, right, we only use it if a wait is over 60 minutes? Or are you going to say, right, we're going to have our lunch, and then straight after lunch we'll get a Premier Access Pass so that we can let our stomach settle, and, you know, that kind of strategy. Are you going to wait till the end of the day so that you can see what other rides you can get done, and then just use the Premier Access for one big ride that you didn't manage to do earlier? Try and think ahead, just to stop you being too impulsive with this particular system. I'm looking after your wallet. Right, next category. This is other general ride tips. Tip number 12, double dip. This is my favourite thing to do. If you do get to a ride that happens to be a very low wait or a walk-on because you've used one of the other tips, then it might be worth kind of really taking advantage of that system and going back round again as soon as you've ridden it. Things I like to do this on: Buzz Lightyear. Because Buzz Lightyear is basically a video game, if you manage to get it when it's a 10 or 15 minute wait, you go on once, you get your score. If it's still a 10 or 15 minute wait when you get out, go straight back on and see if you can beat your own score. This is also fun for Small World, which is often a walk-on, and you can decide in your family, right, we're going to do it again, but I'm going to sit on the other side of the boat so you see different things. And really anything that your family has really enjoyed. If you get off a ride and go, that was amazing, sometimes it's really fun to just pop straight back on again. Tip number 13. Do you know, I'm so sniffy today, guys, and if I sound a bit bunged up and I'm going, it's hay fever time of year. Please forgive my gravelly voice. Tip number 13. Loiter near closed rides. Now then, am I going to regret telling you this? Rides do go down during the day. There might be a mechanical fault. They might need to retrieve something from the side of the ride, so the whole ride will shut. And then when it reopens, there will be zero queue. This can happen any time of the day, can't it? So it might be 2 in the afternoon, all of a sudden there's zero queue for Space Mountain and you get straight on. That's happened to us a couple of times. The problem with this is no one knows how long a ride will be closed when it's closed. So I could tell you to loiter outside a ride exit while it's closed, and you could be stood there staring like a puppy dog at the ride entrance for 2 hours. But it's worth considering if you're planning a bit of an ice cream break and you see that Pirates of the Caribbean is down. Maybe go and eat that ice cream just outside the Pirates entrance so that when it does open, you can be the first ones back on. You know, if you fancy going shopping in Constellations in Discoveryland, maybe keep popping your head back out to see whether or not Space Mountain has reopened. Just to try and I'd say you've got about a 5-minute window where the queue will still be quite small after it reopens. Might not work, but worth a shot. Tip 14, this is less to do with avoiding queues and more just to do with good Disney mental health. I recommend that you alternate long waits with short waits and no waits. So let's say you're going to spend an hour and a half in a queue for Crush. Please don't do that, but you might. Maybe then, rather than get straight in the Tower of Terror queue, which is going to be another hour, maybe go on Slinky Dog Dash, go for a snack, go for a bit of a shop, go for a bit of a wander around, and then get in another long queue. I really wouldn't want to do a Disney day where I'm just doing long queue after long queue after long queue when there's so many other brilliant things to do. There's no need for it. Spread the long queues out. Number 15, know what wait times to expect and know what your own threshold is. Now, I talk about this a lot in the other queue where I just have a more general chat. But if you download the app before you go and you keep looking at what wait times to expect, you know what is a good wait time for a ride and what is a wait time that maybe you're not prepared to do. You might also know as a family that you're willing to wait up to an hour for a really good ride, but not wait longer than that. And it's good to know this before you go because it makes decision making a bit easier when you're there. Download the app, know your wait times. That's my advice. And go back and watch the other video because I'll talk about that in a lot more detail. And then tip 16, there comes a point where you've just got to do it. Just do it. Just join that queue. No matter how long it is, you really want to ride that ride. You will regret going home not riding that ride if you don't. The queue has been consistently an hour long all day. Do you know what? We're going to join that queue. We're going to enjoy being in that queue. And we're going to ride this amazing ride, and that's what's going to happen. If you just refuse to go in the queue and you wait all day for it going down, you're going to make yourself miserable and regret it. Just do the queue. But if you're going to do that long queue, you need to be prepared and you need to enjoy it. So that brings me on to the next few tips. Well, first of all, this isn't really a tip, but have a wee before you go on and make sure all the members of the party have a wee because you won't be allowed in and out of that queue. If you queue in, you queue in, okay? There's no saving places. Tip number 16, take in drinks and snacks. Now, you can take things like ice creams and slushies and maybe a hot dog into an outdoor queue, but you're not allowed it once the queue goes indoors and you have to have finished it by the time you're on the ride. So if it's a 15-minute wait for Pirates of the Caribbean, you're not going to get that hot dog eaten. So there's no point doing that. But what you can do is take dry snacks and snacks in your bag and drinks in bottles with screw tops, because then even if you haven't finished it, they can go back in the bag, you can get on the ride. You can eat them in the inside sections of queues, and there are rubbish bins as you go around to put your rubbish in. But it's good to keep the kids quiet and it keeps everyone happy. Tip 17, play games. This is my favourite thing to do in queues, and this is why I have grown to absolutely love queues when I'm at Disney, is we play games as a family. We play 20 questions. We play, I've been told this is just called slaps, this game where you try do slappy, slappy, slap, slaps. We do the heads up app. You'll have your own games. But another tip I'd like to add to this is maybe start a family tournament of something, because you are going to be in quite a few different queues. So it could be you're keeping score of a certain game, or you take it in turns to be the quiz master on a certain game, and something that can last for the entire holiday. It can really make people look forward to getting into queues so that they can keep working on their score, or they can beat dad at that, or whatever. So maybe start some kind of a tournament going and have some games planned in your head. Tip number 18, I don't love this one, but let's be realistic. You can catch up on your admin. Now, I don't mean your admin to do with your day job. That would be absolutely soul-destroying and terrible to be doing that in a queue at Disney. Please don't do that. But your holiday admin. So you can book restaurants on the app, and you can check other wait times and look at some menus of restaurants. And you can also be uploading your photographs to Instagram. I like to edit videos on my phone, if I'm honest. It's quite good. Although we're usually doing the game playing and the slappy slaps. And then tip number 19 for while you're in the queue. Know your party and be prepared, please. You're going to get to the front of the queue and they're going to say, how many in your party? Or c'est combien? Just say 3. But at this point, you don't want to be turning around and going, how many are the 6 of us? Are the 7? Do you 2 want to ride together? And then Charlie starts moaning that he wants to ride with Dad, but little Becky would rather sit on her own or whatever. Know how you're going to be sitting in that particular ride by the time you get to the front of the queue, because it's very inconvenient for everyone if long conversations break out at that point. And then tip number 20, this one is so important. Look around the queue. Most queues at Disneyland Paris are themed. There are some brilliant queues. I'm talking Indiana Jones, Pirates of the Caribbean, the Haunted Mansion, the inside of Buzz Lightyear, the inside of Space Mountain, or Star Tours. All the animatronics, it's amazing. Don't be reading your Kindle. Don't decide that you're going to read a book, because you won't see anything else. Make sure while you're doing whatever you're doing that you're also looking around at the amazing Imagineering details, because they're so worth a look. And I suppose that takes me on to my final 5 tips. And these are all kind of ride-specific tips. So Phantom Manor. Have I been calling it the Haunted Mansion this entire thing? That's the one in Florida. It's the Phantom Manor. If you don't know, it's in 2 parts. You go into a stretching room, and if you don't know, I'm not telling you what that is because it's too much of a glorious surprise. And then you come out of the stretching room and go towards the ride vehicles. Well, you've been in this stretching room with about 20 other people, 25 other people, and then you're all going to the ride vehicles at the same time. You've no need then to race and fight with the rest of the people to get to be the first one in the ride vehicles. You're all getting on, and you're all getting on quickly. So hang to the back of that pack, because there are some brilliant portraits on the walls, some amazing details in the vases on the tables and the cobwebs and the sculptures that you can have a look at. So don't race for the ride vehicles. Try and be at the back of that group. Tip 22. You might want to ask for a precise row or seat in a ride, depending on your preference. So I'm thinking if you're a thrill seeker, you might want to go on the back row of Big Thunder Mountain, because you go a lot quicker over the hills if you're on the back row. But if you're not a thrill seeker, you might prefer to go on the front row. It's absolutely fine when you get to the front of the queue to ask them, can I go on the front row? Can I go on the back row? But don't be offended or upset if they just say no on this occasion, because they've got a job to do, and their job is to get everybody in seats as quick as they can. And it might be that somebody else has already asked, or they've got a problem with the flow, or they can see that there's some people coming from the disability exit. They might not be able to accommodate you, but they don't mind you asking. Tip number 23 is for the Disneyland Railroad. Now this has got 4 stops: Main Street, the Frontierland entrance, the Fantasyland entrance, the Discoveryland entrance. I would recommend either on the Main Street entrance or the Fantasyland entrance. And the reason for this is most people get on at Main Street and then go all the way around and then get off again. So that means that there will be a lot of people getting off at Main Street, so there'll be a lot more people able to get on. Very few people get off at Frontierland. So when you're waiting at the Frontierland Depot, you can only get on that train if other people get off. So it might be that 3 trains go through and nobody gets off, and therefore nobody gets on. Don't do that. Now, my favourite place to go on is the Fantasyland Depot, because there's never as many people waiting, and people do tend to get the train from Main Street to Fantasyland as literally a mode of transport, so quite a few more people get off at Fantasyland, so you've got a better chance of getting on. Oh, tip 24. This is a bit of a hit and miss cheeky one, but for us it's always worked, and that is Peter Pan's flight, which has a horrendously long queue. They do let children dressed as Tinkerbell or Peter Pan, they let them go in the fast pass with their whole families. They're not going to let them go on their own. Bonnie loves to dress up in the parks, and on several occasions she's dressed as Tinkerbell. And whenever she has, we've walked past Peter Pan and they've said, would she like to go in the fast pass queue? You can even ask, is it still a thing where they're able to go in the fast pass queue? Now, obviously, this kind of thing is at the cast members' discretion, and I don't want to tell you that this is a law and then your little child not get asked. So maybe don't tell, you know, your little girl dressed as Tinkerbell or your little boy dressed as Peter Pan that is what's going to happen, because they might be disappointed. But in our experience, they do usually let them on. I've also heard they do the same with children dressed as Buzz at the Buzz Lightyear game, but we've never dressed as Buzz, so I can't 100% verify that. This is my last tip for today before my voice entirely disappears. Tip number 25. If you're not able to get on a ride this time, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. There is so much to see and do and smell and taste and eat and hear and see at Disneyland Paris that if you happen to not have ridden Pinocchio's adventure at the end of it, you haven't had a bad holiday, you haven't ruined it. And I don't want you to go home on the train going, oh, it was good, but I really wish that I could have got on Ratatouille, or whichever the ride is. There is no single ride at Disneyland Paris that outweighs every other glorious thing there. So I don't want that long queue and you deciding not to go in it and you regretting it. I don't want that to ruin your experience. And if you really, really, really want to go on that ride, you can always go back again next year. Right, that brings us back to the end of another tips video. I've got a third in my queues series planned, and that's where I'm going to rank every queue at Disneyland Paris. So I'm going to try and describe how quick they move, what kind of wait to expect, whether they are good queues with good Imagineering or if they're a bit boring and concretey, because some of them are, if I'm honest. So make sure you like and subscribe so that you're notified when that video is uploaded, and also make sure that you check out our podcast. We go live right here on YouTube at 8:30 every Sunday, and we talk about all the up-to-date news with Disneyland Paris. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.